All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are going deep into Pest. It's a board game that puts you right in the middle of a medieval plague. We've got some excerpts here from the rule book, and we're not just going to, read through all the rules.
Right.
We're going to try and unpack the mechanics, the historical echoes, really kind of get to the heart of the game.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how Pest takes this, pretty terrifying historical event
Oh, yeah.
and turns it into this strategic puzzle.
Right.
It's not just about, surviving the plague. It's about these tough choices you got to make as a leader. Resource management, innovation,
The weight of an entire empire.
yeah, the weight of an entire empire on your shoulders. It's all there.
Yeah, you really get plunged into this medieval empire of Thoka, which is, as you might have guessed, grappling with a plague.
A pretty bad one.
Yeah, we take on the roles of leaders, trying to contain the outbreak, keep our people alive,
Yeah.
and, maybe restore the empire to its former glory. But this game does not sugarcoat things.
No, it really doesn't. It hits you right from the start with these pest cards.
Okay.
Which, dictate where the plague spreads each year.
Oh, wow.
And as the game goes on, more and more sick people appear, so, the pressure just keeps mounting.
So you're constantly on edge.
It's like a ticking time bomb.
And if you let things get out of control, are there consequences?
Oh, yeah, there are big consequences. There's this rule. It's called location destruction.
Okay.
And it really drives that point home. Too many sick people in one place, that location gets wiped out, and then the plague spreads even further.
The chain reaction.
It's a chain reaction, just like in real life.
Yeah.
The rulebook gives this really chilling example. The city of Blesser gets destroyed.
Wow.
And the plague immediately jumps to these nearby towns, Terrace and Mescar.
So it's really showing how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it shows how quickly a localized outbreak can turn into, a widespread disaster.
So you're constantly fighting an uphill battle.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to stay one step ahead
Always.
of this plague.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the Plague Doctor Meeple comes in, right?
Right.
I'm picturing a tiny meeple in a beaked mask running around the board.
Exactly.
What kind of headaches does the Plague Doctor give players strategically?
Well, the Plague Doctor's like your boots on the ground.
Okay.
Your main agent on the map. You use it to gather the sick,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully before they overwhelm a location, and to construct buildings,
Okay.
which are vital for fighting the plague and generating the resources you need.
Okay.
But every move you make with the Plague Doctor has to be carefully calculated.
So it's not just I'll run around and scoop up all the sick people.
No, there's a real push and pull between trying to save lives
Yeah.
and managing your own resources, because moving the Plague Doctor costs food.
Oh, okay.
And if you gather too many sick people, you risk overloading your quarantine.
Oh, so there are consequences.
Big time.
Interesting.
So it becomes this question of do you rush into the most infected areas,
Right.
potentially save lives, but jeopardize your own ability to contain the disease?
Right.
Or do you take a more cautious approach, focus on building up your infrastructure
Yeah.
before you venture into the danger zones?
That's a tough choice. It's like short-term versus long-term thinking.
Exactly.
It's something any leader facing a disaster has to grapple with.
Totally.
And speaking of tools, strategic tools,
Mm-hmm.
there's this thing called the containment camp.
Right.
Tell me more about that.
That's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
It's incredibly powerful for clearing an area of the sick,
Right.
but it's not a permanent solution. You can only have one.
Okay.
And once you place it, it's stuck there until you actually build on that location.
Well, wow.
So it's powerful, but you have to use it wisely.
So it's really like a last resort, almost.
Yeah, kind of a desperate measure to stop the plague from spiraling out of control.
You mentioned resources earlier.
Yeah. How does the game handle that whole resource management aspect? Resource management is like the heart of Pest, honestly.
Okay.
You have 4 main resources.
Okay.
Lumber, stone, those are your building blocks of your defenses.
Yeah, the classic building materials.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have food, which is like the fuel for your Plague Doctor's expeditions.
Oh, okay.
And herbs,
Oh, interesting.
which are the precious key to curing the sick.
So every choice you make about how to spend these is going to have a ripple effect
Oh, huge ripple effect.
on how well you can handle this plague.
For sure.
It's giving me vibes of other strategy games where you're juggling all these different priorities.
Absolutely.
You've also got coins,
Right.
which act like a wild card resource.
Yeah.
Does that add a little bit of a twist?
It adds a nice wrinkle to the game
Okay.
because they give you some much-needed flexibility. You could use them in place of any of the other resources.
Oh, so they're like a backup.
Exactly. Which can be a lifesaver when you're short on something.
Yeah, when you're in a pinch.
Totally. And then you've got assistants.
Okay.
Those are the little meeples that represent your workforce.
Uh-huh.
You get more of them in later eras, which allows for more complex strategies as the game goes on.
So you're not just reacting to the plague. You're trying to, like, build up your capacity to handle it.
So you got to build up your capacity.
Which makes sense. As things escalate, you need more people, more resources.
Oh, sure.
And of course, no medieval plague game would be complete without some attempts to fight the disease.
Right.
So that's where technologies come in.
Exactly.
Tell me these aren't just like leech treatments and praying harder.
Thankfully, no.
Okay, good.
The technology cards represent a whole range of innovations.
Okay.
Like advancements in medicine, infrastructure improvements, logistical solutions.
And it's like they're acknowledging that you need to tackle this from all angles.
Absolutely. It's a multifaceted approach.
Yeah. What are some of the coolest or most interesting ones strategically?
Well, we've already mentioned the breathing apparatus.
Right.
Allows for that gradual healing over time.
Right.
And then there's the clone experiment, which lets you teleport your plague doctor across the map.
Oh, wow.
Talk about strategic mobility.
That one sounds really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
So you're not just reacting, you can try and think ahead.
You can anticipate where it might strike next.
Yeah.
And position your plague doctor accordingly.
What other innovations can players discover?
Well, there are cards like Disinfectant.
Okay.
Which lets you gather resources from locations where your opponents have built.
It's like a little bit of economic warfare.
A little bit.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of disrupt your plans and bolster your own resource production.
Okay.
And then there are technologies like Medical Mask, which lets you ignore a sick person when you're moving your plague doctor into a location.
Oh, that's handy.
It's a way to mitigate the risk of gathering the sick while still reaching those crucial areas.
Yeah. So it's like the game is saying, yes, the plague is terrifying, but there are ways to fight back.
Right.
Ways to find solutions. And it sounds like these technologies, some of them, offer really interesting strategic choices.
They do. It's not just about blindly applying every technology you research.
Right.
You got to think about how it fits into your overall strategy.
Right.
And how it might impact the game for you and for your opponents.
So we've got this spreading plague, this race against time, limited resources, and then this whole menu of technological solutions to explore.
Yeah.
But there's more to this game than just surviving. Pest isn't just about hunkering down.
No.
There's this whole capital city element. And it's not just window dressing.
It adds a whole other layer to the game, strategically and thematically.
Really?
It's not just a pretty picture on the board.
Okay.
It's a hub of activity, a place where you can compete with other players for rewards.
So it's not just about containing the plague in your territory.
Right.
You're trying to make a name for yourself.
You got to prove you're the best leader.
You're the one who can guide the empire through this.
Exactly.
What kind of strategic choices does that present?
Well, Capital City is where you can construct special buildings that give you bonuses, like extra resources, influence points, and even renown, which is how you ultimately win.
So you really are jockeying for position with the other leaders.
You are.
It's almost like a political element layered on top of the plague.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the influence track itself is tied to the Capital City.
Okay.
And it creates a really fascinating dynamic.
How so?
The player with the most influence goes last in each round.
Oh, interesting.
Which might seem like a disadvantage at first.
Yeah.
But it means that players who are falling behind actually get to act first in the next round.
Oh, that's a good way to balance things out.
It's a really clever way to keep things balanced and prevent any one player from running away with the game.
So there's always that back and forth.
Always a back and forth.
You can make a comeback.
You can always make a comeback.
Now, every good board game needs, goals.
Right.
Objectives. How does Pest handle that?
Pest uses this really cool system called decree cards.
Okay.
They set the agenda for each era of the game.
Oh, interesting.
And each decree card has an agenda.
Okay.
Which rewards players for focusing on specific goals.
Okay, so give me an example.
So, for example, you might have the Heal the People agenda.
Okay.
Which rewards players who have a large, healthy population.
So if that's the agenda in play, you gotta prioritize that.
You got to prioritize curing the sick.
Yeah.
Maybe invest in technologies that help with that.
So you really do have to look at the agenda.
Oh, absolutely.
Tailor your strategy to it.
You can't just blindly amass points.
Right.
You got to pay attention to the current agenda.
And I imagine those change from game to game.
They change every game.
So it keeps it fresh.
Keeps it fresh and interesting.
Each decree card also has something called imperatives.
Yes.
What are those?
Those are like ongoing challenges throughout the era.
Okay.
They're like mini quests.
Okay.
That reward you with influence and renown.
Okay.
For fulfilling certain conditions.
Like what?
It might be something like building a certain number of structures.
Okay.
Gathering a certain amount of resources, or even researching a specific technology.
So you've got a lot of balls in the air.
A lot of balls in the air.
You're dealing with the immediate crisis. You're trying to score points.
Right.
You're tackling these imperatives. And all of this is feeding into your renown score.
Exactly. Players accumulate renown points for all sorts of achievements.
Okay.
From constructing buildings to having a healthy population, completing agendas and imperatives, and even just having influence.
So almost every action you take can impact your score.
Almost every action matters in Pest.
But I did notice in the rulebook something called negative renown.
Ah,
yes.
What's that all about?
That's the game's way of saying,
you can't just ignore the sick and hope for the best.
Okay.
You get penalized if you have too many dead people in your graveyard at the end of each era.
So it's like a reminder of the human cost.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of this plague.
You're not just managing numbers, you're dealing with people's lives.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing is that Pest manages to weave together the history, the strategic challenges, and the thematic depth.
It does.
In a way that makes it more than just a game.
It's a simulation. It's a thought experiment.
It's a way to engage with history.
On a personal level.
Yeah, I'm already hooked.
Me too.
And we haven't even talked about the advanced rules for the two-player versus, or the solo mode.
Yeah, there's a lot more to uncover.
What are some of the key differences players can expect?
Well, for starters, both the two-player versus and the solo mode introduce this neutral presence that you'll be competing against. It's like the game recognizes that even when you're playing alone, you're still facing the challenges of leadership.
Yeah.
You still have that responsibility for your people.
So you can never truly escape the weight of leadership.
But never escape.
Even when you're playing solo.
Even when you're playing solo.
That's an interesting concept. So Pest really has a lot more to offer than meets the eye.
Oh, for sure.
I'm excited to dive deeper into those different game modes and see how they twist things up. But before I move on, I'm just curious, what stood out to you so far?
What's really fascinated me is how the game manages to capture the complexity of the historical period.
Right.
Without getting bogged down in overly detailed simulations.
Yeah, that's a good balance.
It strikes a balance between historical accuracy and engaging gameplay, which is a tough feat to pull off.
Yeah, you don't want to make it too dry.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by those technology cards. I feel like they're the key to unlocking those really interesting strategies.
They are.
Maybe even turning the tide.
They're definitely worth exploring in more detail.
Well then, let's not waste any more time. Let's shift gears and delve into those two-player and solo modes.
Let's do it.
And then we're going to take a closer look at those technologies.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
You know, it's really cool how Pest adapts to different player counts.
Yeah.
And it even has a really good solo experience.
Right.
It's not just a one-size-fits-all.
Right, yeah.
It really tailors the challenge to, whether you're going head-to-head with another player or strategizing with a group or even just testing your skills against the game itself.
That's what I love about these well-designed games.
Yeah.
They create such a different experience depending on who you're playing with, who you're playing against.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with that two-player versus variant.
Okay.
What sets it apart?
It introduces some really clever twists to the rules that really ramp up the competition. So you're not just trying to, manage the plague and score points.
Yeah.
You're directly trying to outmaneuver your opponent.
Okay.
So the influence track, for example, it becomes like a battleground.
Oh, wow.
You actually want to push your opponent into those negative renown spaces.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like...
So you're using the influence as a weapon almost.
You're using it as a weapon to hinder your opponent.
Wow.
And the scoring for imperatives is adjusted too.
Uh-huh.
You only get renowned for exceeding the preset minimum on the track.
Right.
So you're not just trying to complete the objective, you're trying to outperform your opponent.
Yeah, to show you're the better leader.
To prove that you're the better leader.
Yeah.
It creates this constant back and forth.
Yeah.
This sense of one-upmanship.
Yeah. Which is so fun in those two-player games.
Yeah. You got to keep an eye on what your opponent's doing.
You're constantly watching them.
Yeah. And then there's the capital city, which becomes even more important strategically.
Yeah.
The player with the most healthy people in the capital city gets the top reward. But the other player only gets a consolation prize if they have more people there than the neutral population.
So you're both like vying for the favor of the empire.
Exactly. It's like
it adds this nice political element.
It adds a whole other layer of strategy and thematic richness to the game.
Yeah, for sure.
It really does. The two-player variant also introduces a new scoring element at the end of the game.
Okay.
The player with the most constructed capital city buildings gets bonus renown.
Oh, okay. So those buildings are even more valuable.
They become super valuable.
So it's like a final showdown almost.
It is like a final showdown to see who contributed the most to the empire's recovery.
It sounds like it really amps up the tension.
Oh, yeah.
The strategic complexity.
Big time.
You're walking a tightrope.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Trying to do what's best for you.
Trying to do what's best for your people.
Yeah.
But also, like, outmaneuvering your opponent.
Right.
It really captures that tension of leading during a crisis.
Yeah.
You got to make tough choices that might benefit you, but could also harm your rivals.
So now let's switch gears. Talk about the solo mode.
Okay.
I'm always curious to see how games handle that.
Right.
How does Pest do it?
Pest does a fantastic job of creating a really challenging and engaging solo experience.
Okay.
And it uses a similar concept to the two-player variant.
Okay.
Where you're essentially competing against this, like, neutral presence.
Right.
Represented by the empire itself.
Okay.
So it's like you're playing against the game itself.
It's a good way to put it.
You're trying to prove that you're worthy of leading Thoka through this crisis.
You're trying to outsmart the game almost.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle to solve.
Yeah, I like that.
And just like in the two-player variant, the solo mode introduces some additional wrinkles to the rules.
Right.
For example, the neutral population actually occupies spaces in the capital city. So you have to compete with them to earn those rewards.
Okay, so you can't just waltz in.
No.
Take what you want.
You got to fight for it.
So the capital city is still a focal point.
It's still a focal point, even in solo play.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
You're still trying to prove yourself.
You're trying to prove that you're the most capable leader.
Right.
The one who can best guide the empire to recovery.
How do the imperative tracks work in solo?
So they add another layer of challenge in solo mode.
Okay.
You only gain renown if you manage to push your marker past the pre-placed sick people on those tracks.
So it's like you have to exceed those requirements.
They got to exceed them.
Yeah, just to prove yourself.
To prove your worth.
Yeah, yeah.
And because you're playing solo, you can really focus on mastering the mechanics.
Right.
Experimenting with different strategies.
Yeah, you can really get into the weeds.
You can get into the nitty-gritty details of the game.
Yeah.
Explore all the different possibilities.
It's almost like a sandbox mode where you can just like try stuff out.
Try stuff out and see what works best.
Yeah.
The rulebook also mentions that there's a unique scoring system.
Okay.
And a ranking system for solo mode.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So instead of just counting renown points, you're evaluated on how well you managed the plague and advanced your empire.
Oh, that's interesting.
So at the end of the game, you tally up any remaining sick people on the influence track, the imperative tracks, public buildings, and in your graveyard.
So it's really like a final assessment.
It's a final assessment of your leadership.
Like a report card almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just about like earning points.
It's about minimizing the impact of the plague.
Yeah.
And like ensuring the well-being of your people.
It's a more nuanced way.
It's much more nuanced.
Yeah.
And thematically appropriate way.
Yeah, for sure.
To measure success in a game about leading through a crisis.
And then you get ranked.
And based on your final score, you get ranked.
Oh, wow.
On a scale from like commoner to emperor.
So you can challenge yourself?
You can always challenge yourself.
To get a better score.
Yeah, to achieve a higher rank each time you play.
It adds that replayability.
Exactly.
Yep.
It speaks to that core idea behind Pest, right? That you're not just playing a game.
Right.
You're stepping into the role of a leader.
Right.
Making these tough choices.
Yeah.
With real consequences.
And that experience is just as compelling.
Yeah.
Whether you're solo or...
Whether you're playing solo or with other people.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've talked about the mechanics.
Yeah.
The strategic challenges.
The history, the nuances of the two-player. And the solo.
Two-player, the solo.
But I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We are just scratching the surface.
There's a whole world of those technology cards.
Right. We've only hinted at a few of the technologies.
Yeah.
There are a whole deck of cards.
Right.
Each representing a unique innovation.
Right.
That can potentially, like, shift the tide of the plague.
Yeah.
Shape the future of your empire.
They're not just about finding a cure. It's about adapting and mitigating and maybe even finding opportunity.
Yeah, finding opportunity amidst the chaos.
Amidst the chaos.
The technology cards are where Pest really shines.
Okay.
In terms of its strategic depth and historical resonance.
Well, then let's not waste any more time.
Let's dive in.
Let's dive into those technology cards and see what wonders of medieval innovation await us. All right, so we've talked about the spreading plague, we've talked about this race against time, and the tough choices you got to make as a leader in Pest.
Right.
But now it's time to dive into what I'm calling, medieval innovation.
Yeah, okay.
Those technology cards.
Yeah, the technology cards are really interesting because they represent a society grappling with this crisis on multiple levels.
Right.
Like, it's not just about finding that magical cure. It's about infrastructure, logistics, even social programs, right?
Like, it's holistic.
It's a very holistic approach to fighting this plague.
So no, rub this magical herb on it and call me in the morning.
No magical herbs here.
Okay, good.
But yeah, give us some examples. What are some of the coolest, most impactful technologies in Pest?
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about the breathing apparatus.
Right.
It allows for that gradual healing, right?
Yeah.
It's that slow and steady approach.
Yeah.
Like a medieval ICU where you're carefully managing resources,
Right.
hoping for the best.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have clone experiment.
Oh, yeah.
Instant teleportation for your plague doctor.
That's a game changer.
Especially when you're trying to get to like a key building
Oh, yeah.
in the capital city or something.
Especially when you're in a tight spot.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly having this secret weapon.
Right.
You can outmaneuver your opponents, respond to these outbreaks with incredible speed.
Yeah.
But some technologies are more about prevention, long-term solutions.
Yeah.
For example, there's disinfectant
Okay.
that lets you gather resources from locations where your opponents have built.
So a little bit of like economic warfare.
A little bit of economic warfare, yeah.
Interesting.
You're using the plague as an opportunity to gain an advantage over your rivals.
It's ruthless, but I kind of like it.
It's a little ruthless, but it's tempting, right?
Yeah, yeah. What other kind of defensive measures are there?
Well, a great example is the medical mask.
Okay.
It's simple but effective.
Right.
It lets you bypass a sick person when you're moving your plague doctor.
Oh, okay.
So it reduces the risk of overloading your quarantine.
Yeah, it's that classic dilemma of like, do I rush in to save everyone, risk my own safety and resources, or do I take a more calculated approach?
Exactly.
So this medical mask gives you that option.
It gives you that option.
And a bit more cautious.
To navigate that plague-ridden landscape more cautiously.
Yeah, and it makes me think about how even those simple innovations can have a huge impact during a crisis.
Totally. And Pest doesn't shy away from the social and economic impacts of the plague either.
Right.
Like the employment program technology gives you bonus renown for each healthy person assigned to your buildings.
Oh, interesting.
So it really highlights the importance of keeping people employed, contributing to the economy, even during a crisis.
I really like how the game incorporates these real-world considerations. It's not just winning at all costs. It's like thinking about how to rebuild society, even while you're battling this disease.
Absolutely.
It adds so much meaning.
It makes you think.
Yeah.
And then you have technologies that directly address resource management.
Okay.
Like the production line.
Okay.
This one doubles the output of your castle, which is huge.
So you can really ramp up your production.
Oh, yeah. You can get those resources flowing.
Yeah, especially as the game goes on.
Especially later in the game.
You need to build those more complex structures.
You need those resources.
Expand your operations.
It's all about maximizing efficiency.
Right. Yeah.
Getting the most out of those limited resources.
What about technologies that let you stockpile resources?
Yeah. There's the storage containers technology.
Okay.
It lets you hoard a specific resource.
Oh, okay.
To kind of like give you that buffer.
Right. So if a bad year hits.
Yeah. If there's a shortage.
Yeah, you're prepared.
You're prepared.
You're thinking ahead.
Thinking ahead, planning for the long term.
I like it. Are there any technologies that directly impact your opponents?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The examination desk, for instance.
Okay.
Lets you gain coins whenever an opponent's plague doctor enters a location where you have a building.
It's like you're capitalizing on their efforts.
You're turning their actions to your advantage.
You're profiting off their movement.
It adds that strategic intrigue.
Yeah, you're constantly watching them.
You're always aware of what your opponents are doing.
Yeah.
And how you can kind of exploit their actions.
What if you need to, like, get somewhere quickly and an opponent's in the way?
Oh, for that, there's the moving permit.
Okay.
Lets you move through your opponent's buildings.
Oh, wow.
Without spending movement points.
That's huge.
It can be a real game changer.
Yeah.
When you're trying to reach that key location.
Yeah.
Outmaneuver your rivals.
You're using their infrastructure against them.
Exactly. It really highlights the competitive nature of the game.
It does,
Yeah.
but it's not all about, like, the big picture, right?
Right.
Pest also remembers, like, the individuals, the
Yeah.
plague doctors on the front lines.
The heroes on the front lines.
Yeah.
So for that, you have the protective uniform technology.
Okay.
It blocks sick people from being placed in your districts during the pest phase.
Okay.
So it shields your population, your workforce, from the worst effects of the outbreak.
It's like giving your plague doctors that extra layer of protection.
That extra layer of protection.
Yeah.
It's a small detail.
Yeah.
But it adds that thematic depth.
It adds that emotional resonance.
It reminds us that these aren't just figures on a board.
Right.
These are real people putting themselves in harm's way.
Yeah. To help others.
To help others. And then you have technologies that inject a bit of unpredictability into the game.
Okay.
Like the Scholar's Card.
Okay.
It lets you reassign one of your people from the capital city back to your healthy population.
Yeah. Okay.
Or to one of your buildings.
So it's kind of like a wild card?
The wild card, yeah.
Way to adapt, react.
Flexibility is so important in a game like this.
It is, because things change so quickly.
Things can change dramatically from one turn to the next.
Are there any that are just, like, straight up powerful?
Oh, yeah. The adrenaline shot's a big one.
Okay.
It lets you replay a combination of actions that you've already used that year.
Oh, wow.
So you get a second chance.
So if you messed up, you're like, wait.
Yeah. Hold on, I need to do that again.
It's like a burst of energy.
It's a sudden burst of energy and efficiency.
You get to push yourself beyond your limits.
It's exciting. Keeps you on your toes.
And then Pest doesn't forget those little touches of humor,
Right.
realism that make it so engaging.
Totally.
Like, there's the airborne medicine card.
Yeah.
Lets you discard a sick person from your quarantine.
So it represents those rare cases where someone might just recover on their own.
Yeah, without intervention.
Without any intervention.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of this plague,
Yeah.
there's hope.
There's always hope.
Things can turn around.
Things can turn around.
It's nice to have a little bit of optimism.
A little bit of optimism, right.
Yeah.
And then you have cards like the quarantine tent and the quarantine house.
Okay.
They just increase your capacity to quarantine sick people.
Okay.
They highlight that struggle, right?
Yeah.
Of providing adequate care and preventing the spread.
You can't let your guard down.
No, you got to keep building, keep researching, keep fighting.
This deep dive into these technology cards has been so fascinating.
That's been fun.
They're not just game mechanics.
They're a reflection of the human spirit, you know?
Yeah.
Ingenuity, the resilience, even the desperation of a society facing this plague.
Pest doesn't shy away from those tough questions.
No, it doesn't.
You know, it forces you to make those tough choices.
The real consequence.
For your people.
Yeah.
For the empire as a whole.
So if you were leading a medieval empire facing a devastating plague, what would your top priority be?
Ooh, good question. Containing the spread, finding a cure, protecting your people's well-being.
There's no easy answer, right?
Right.
That's what makes the game so compelling.
Yeah.
It reminds us that leadership isn't about those simple solutions.
Right.
It's about navigating those complex challenges with courage, compassion,
Yeah.
and a willingness to make those tough choices.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Pest.
It's been a pleasure.
A game that's as challenging as it is rewarding.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of board games.